Welcome back to the Sunday Talk Show here on the Arise News Channel. I'm Reuben, Abati. President Trump made headlines today after he used social media to encourage fans to stay away from NFL games if players don't stand up for the national anthem, and he even went further to say such players should be fired if they disrespect the American flag. We're joined from Washington by Arise News correspondent Eric Ham to discuss this further. Eric? Eric?
Morning.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on This Day Live. With me in the studio, I have with me Professor Bola, Akinterinwa, Yemi, Adamolekun, and Olaleye. Now, with what happened today, how will the NFL owners who donated to Trump's inauguration react to his recent comments?
Actually, I think many of them will see this as the president actually throwing them under the bus. We have to understand that you had as many as 8 NFL owners, very wealthy men, give the president more than $7 million to his actual presidential inauguration. And as a result of that, what do they get in return? They get the president actually calling for consumers to either boycott games if players continue to kneel in protest of the national anthem, or that owners need to actually fire players for their protest, for their demonstrations. So now what you're seeing is you're seeing the president of the United States pitted against one of the most powerful and influential entities in the United States, and that's the National Football League.
Well, is there any political benefit President Trump thinks he could gain from such comments?
Actually, there is. If you know, Donald Trump right now, his base of support is around 35%. And so if you look at where he stands legislatively, he is again looking as though he will fail on getting a health care repeal bill through the Congress. And so as a result of that, what he's doing is he's doubling down on these racial social issues. And so his base is actually going to coalesce around him even more. So his base will be with him, because now what they see is they see wealthy, coddled, particularly African-American athletes demonstrating against what they see is their heritage. And so they're going to stand with the president over players, over the league on this issue. And so I think Donald Trump's base is going to actually begin to skyrocket as a result.
So you are saying invariably that that statement will shape the racial trajectory of the United States?
Yes, I think what you're seeing in the United States is I think you're seeing a president who is using race as a means to not only just, he's not trying to divide the country, but what the president is trying to do is he's trying to ensure that the electorate is further divided and that you see blocks. So he's dividing people along racial lines, ethnic lines, gender lines, and demographic lines, and class lines. And so if you can keep the electorate divided by many blocks, then if your block is the strongest, that'll ensure that he maintains his political power.
Well, we saw players at Wembley either take a knee or stand with arms interlocked. Are we likely to see more statements like these being made?
Well, I think you will. I mean, we kick off in the United States around most games begin around the 1 o'clock Eastern time hour. And so remember, if you look at what took place in Wimbledon, you had at least 25 players who actually kneeled. And in fact, you had one of the owners of one of those teams who actually donated $1 million to President Trump's inauguration, locked in arms with his players in support of their demonstrations. And so I think what you're going to see is, I think you will see more players begin to kneel, not only to protest injustice, but they're actually sending a message that they're in protesting the words and the deeds of this president. And so I think you could begin to see more fallout at the NFL, and I think this will be a direct detriment to the owners because this could hurt the bottom line for the league itself.
As part of the fallouts, do you see any connection between this and the repeal bill of Obamacare?
Yes, and the Congress, the Senate is looking to take up the Obamacare repeal bill probably tomorrow or Tuesday of this week. And already former presidential candidate John McCain has stated that he will not support this bill. So this could be an effort by the president to detract from, again, another high-profile failure of his inability to move on one of his campaign promises, and that is to repeal Obamacare. So one way to do that is to play on the fears of social issues, of race and justice by wealthy, as he would call it, coddled athletes. And some of the code could be, you look at who he's targeting. These are primarily African-American players. And so this could be a way to detract from his agenda, which so far hasn't seen much success in Congress.
Eric, Wale has a question for you from here. Over to you, Wale.
Eric, hi. You just subtly alluded to my question. I was going to ask you if it was a smart distraction from the real issues of governance in the United States, and I think you just made a smart one there.
Yemi, a question or a comment?
It's just, I guess,
yeah, but if I can add to that also, not only are we seeing his legislative agenda being stalled, but if you look at where we stand, particularly in our continued ratcheting of words between President Donald Trump and North Korea leader Kim Jong-un, you look at it and it looks like the United States is headed to a showdown with North Korea. So you've got North Korea, you've got failed Obamacare legislation, and in the midst of all of this, what everyone is talking about is protests and the NFL. And again, there are much larger issues, but again, I think Donald Trump is at a loss as to how to adequately deal with these issues.
Okay, another question from Yemi here, Eric. Yeah.
So we've gone from NFL. He also has fighting with Steve Curry, the Warriors, and going to the NBA. And LeBron James has made a statement. Now, is it baseball next? I mean, you're taking sports is a huge part of American culture. So NFL, NBA, then we're going to do baseball?
Well, it's funny that you should mention that because actually last night at a baseball game, we saw for the first time. Not only did we see a baseball player kneel during the playing of the national anthem, but you saw one of the white players actually place their arms on the player to actually show his solidarity. So for the first time, you're now seeing baseball players come out and kneel for the national anthem where we had never seen that before. So I think we are seeing we're seeing a shift where now the major sports entities, sports associations are now coming out and protesting Donald Trump. And so now that puts Donald Trump, I think, on the wrong end of this, particularly when you look at sports activism in this country is about 50 years old. I mean, we saw a protest back in the 60s during the Mexico Olympics where we saw John Carlos with the black glove raise a fist of black power. Muhammad Ali. So demonstrations by athletes is actually as American as apple pie. And I think Donald Trump is on the wrong end of some of these very wealthy, very influential organizations.
One more question, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I appreciate your analysis, but the analysis raises a new question. If you did argue that the U.S. president is dividing the polity on the basis of gender, ethnicism, and so on and so forth, but you are right. because he's actually doing so. Wouldn't you think that by doing so, actually, rather than having a convenient environment, staying in power, don't you think that it is actually detrimental to his survival? Because the more divided the polity is, all right, the weaker he necessarily becomes. And in the long run, in terms of electoral consideration, he wouldn't be able to survive politically.
He's probably putting his second term bid at risk.
Yeah, precisely.
Yes. Eric?
No, right. No, I mean, I think that's a risk that Donald Trump, I think, is willing to play. I think Donald Trump believes that, I mean, look, Donald Trump became president without a majority of Americans in support of his candidacy. He lost the popular vote by 3 million votes. But Donald Trump recognizes it's that very small minority base that actually delivered him the Electoral College. And so he's doubling down on that. He's not trying to expand his base. I believe he's thinking, if I can maintain that support, which won me the presidency, that support will be there for me in 4 years if I continue to cater to them. And if I continue to divide the country, that only increases and strengthens my base. So it's a gamble for sure, but it's a gamble that I think he's willing to play.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you. You're watching the Sunday Talk Show here on the Arise channel. And we've just been talking with our Washington correspondent, Eric Ham. Now, I'm Reuben Abati, reaching you from Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos. We're heading for a short break now. We'll be back.
Our customers are focused, versatile, superheroes. Our customers are also the most important people in our world. So we listen, partner, and give solutions that make a difference in their world. At First Bank, we will always put you first.
You first. First Bank.
The best way to predict the future is to create it. There's a special breed of achievers out there that are called tomorrow's people, the highly creative ones who live in the future. They imagine what will be and strive to make it happen. They're bold. They refuse to wait for the future. Tomorrow bends and conforms to their ideas. At Access Bank, we share the same sentiments. We've been able to grow our bank to become a leading player in Nigeria with a strong presence across the continent, adopting best practice in everything we do. Our mantra for success is simple: speed, service, and security. Those who shape tomorrow, strive for, and demand perfection. At Access Bank, our service culture of speedy response and drive for excellence is the blueprint for creating customer experiences that will echo for generations. Come, let's work together and take tomorrow.
If you never use your own Etisalat SIM, we'll be 9 mobile now for 30 days or more. Go and pick it up. Make you enjoy 20 times your recharge. If you haven't used your own Etisalat SIM, which is now 9 mobile for 30 days or more, go and pick it up. Can't find your SIM? Visit any 9 mobile experience center to do a SIM swap. Then enjoy 20 times your recharge. Get on 9 mobile to enjoy this massive value.
Faisal, you there house? Where the cows?
Papa, I just can't carry my SIM, so I go enjoy this 9 mobile awoof.
9 Mobile. Here for you. Here for Naija.
There is a reason Africa is called the new frontier. What was once potential is now an opportunity ready to be seized. Once revered for our resources, today's wealth lies in our people. People who build the cities that shape the future. People who know an idea in one place means business in another. A generation for whom technology means there are no borders, no boundaries. We are the new lions in a brave new world, kings of the urban jungle. And there's a bank that puts the world in our pocket and the future in our hands. UBA, Africa's global bank.
Welcome back to the Sunday Talk Show here on the Arise News channel. I'm Reuben Abati. Now, in the week that just ended, we had the 72nd session of the United Nations General Assembly. It's an annual ritual. But this year's meeting of world leaders is interesting for a number of reasons. If not for nothing else, the exchange among some of the world leaders and the opportunities that it also provided to focus on key issues engaging the world today. And then also our president was there, and which, we once said on this program, it's an important thing to, make Nigeria's presence felt. And the president of Nigeria also delivered a speech which attracted a lot of reactions at home, in the same manner, of course, in which the rest of the international community was concerned about statements made by the president, the North Korean representative to the United Nations, the statement made by President Mugabe, and of course the provocative statements, very comparative statements made by President Donald Trump, who seems to have a talent in that direction. But Prof, you are the diplomacy and international relations expert. How will you assess the just ended United Nations General Assembly in terms of the outcomes?
Well, I would simply say that it is more or less a change in continuity. Continuity in the sense that, and you have rightly pointed it out yourself, that, look, it's annual ritual. So the continuity is that, well, on an annual basis, the UN General Assembly will meet second Tuesday of September for the whole year. So it's annual ritual. There's no big deal about that. No big deal because at the end of the day, we distinguish between two types of debates. The first type of debate is arguing for and against. The second type of debate is the United Nations type, in which every leader, every country will make a statement expressing its view of international questions and so on and so forth. Their concerns, what they want the international community to do, their foreign policy positions. In this case, we talk about change at that level in terms of tactical approaches and in terms of newness of issues, topics there is. So in terms of outcome, assessment, evaluation, I think this year's hunger that has just started is a platform for raising new critical questions that are likely to destabilize the international community in the foreseeable future. And the many examples you have given are manifestations of the dangers ahead. Most of the statements that have been made, generally speaking, they are made against the background of self-deceit. Nobody is talking about the truth. So people present their own views of the world, their positions of the world, and all purporting to be seeking international peace and security. Most unfortunately, I think the speeches are truly not addressing, the threats to global peace and security.
Well, President Buhari, let us start from home. For example, spoke about the threat that terrorism poses and international cooperation to combat that. That's a major issue for the world. He talked about the nuclear threat posed particularly by North Korea. That, of course, will be something that is worthy.
Yes, you are right. But
yes.
You see, that is one side of the story. Now, for instance, talking about terrorism is good, but who is not aware of the fact that many states do sponsor terrorism? And whereas the countries that have done agreements, that signed agreement, that ratified agreement, they are also sponsoring terrorism. Please do not forget that in 1963, when the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was done, did China sign it? Did France sign it? But when these two countries went back and succeeded in perfecting their atomic weapons, they now came back really to say, yes, we can now sign. All right? The second point there is that those who are against nuclearization, all right, they have refused to destroy their own nuclear arms. They are only trying to prevent, others from accessing it.
Do you agree with this
So
point?
this is the self-deceit we are talking
about double standards.
Yes.
About some countries like the United States, assuming and projecting themselves as being mightier than other nations, even if, of course,
Yeah, I mean,
geopolitics has its own logic.
It has its own logic, but he's quite right about that, in the sense that you have your weapons, but you're trying to prevent other countries. Because there's a sense that America believes that they are responsible custodians of such weapons, whereas a China or a North Korea or other such countries are, in a sense, as Trump called him, a madman, loose cannon, who can just decide on a whim. So they're not bound by any sort of ethics of diplomacy or global whatever words you use for it. So I think there's a bit of that in saying that we've gone through this, we understand we have the power, but we will not use the power irresponsibly. So yeah, I mean, it's very much debatable, and I don't think we have.
But you are quite right. You know what the North Korean leader said? That if North Korea had not made efforts to acquire, their nuclear capacity and capability in place, that the US and its allies will have meted out to them what they did to Syria. See, so for in the eyes of
what they probably also did to North Korea in 1950.
So they're protecting themselves.
Yes, so
but it's interesting though, and I guess sort of piggyback on that point. So America is presenting itself as someone who would use its powers responsibly. However, in President Trump's statement, the fact that he basically said, if the president misbehaves, I will destroy North Korea. So you're taking the actions of one man to now give you license to, in a sense, destroy an entire country?
Well, it's not about one man.
Yeah, but putting it loosely, who at what point do you then draw the line on who pays the price for what? I mean, an average North Korean doesn't really particularly care to die.
No, but you see, Yemi, I think the Americans have simply refused to learn from its own history.
Okay.
Remember the history, the story of the little man and the fat man. That is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By the time the Japanese launched attacks on Pearl Harbor, in the belief that it would take at least 6 months for the Americans to reconstitute their vessels and come into the war, the Japanese simply forgot that the Americans had developed atomic weapons. Nobody knew. So in this case, when the Japanese attacked the Americans in an unprovoked situation, Americans are yet to enter into the war on the side of the Allies. Now, they responded by giving them the little man, Augustus, and the fat man, 48 hours thereafter.
Follow up.
Yeah, now they surrendered. So now the Americans should not underestimate North Korea. As it is, you never can tell.
Coming from his own experience.
In fact, the North Korean Foreign Affairs Minister, Ri, he was saying that America is on a suicide mission.
Precisely.
And that the way President Trump talks is making an attack of mainland America almost inevitable.
You're right. I don't think the North Korean leader is bluffing. I think he means business.
Even if he was bluffing, at least he's shown.
It's not just North Korea. You know, Iran also. At this year's described Trump as being absurd. You know,
it is not because
and it's a master of hate speech.
Which I will have to agree with.
What does this portend actually for the rest of the world?
You see, it is not because China will have been towing the line of the United Nations Security Council in terms of taking sanctionary measures against North Korea. China, Russia, and many others are much likely to give active support to North Korea. In the event there is problem, because the security of China is necessarily tied to regional security there. So China is more interested in regional security, not about
when the chips are down,
precisely.
They will go the other way.
Well, there's been one reaction. You know, I said earlier that President Buhari's statement on North Korea, you know, generated some interest. Although Nigeria has to play its role within the international community. And when Nigeria goes to the UN General Assembly, it takes certain positions that makes it look as if there is an African consensus, you know, if not a West African consensus. But many Nigerians have said, what is Nigeria's concern with what is happening in North Korea when we have our own issues at home here? Instead of talking about IPOB and talking about other things that affected us directly. You know, I dismiss that as many Nigerians having, you know, an insular attitude towards international politics. But what's your reaction to this? In fact, some people even said the president should not even have gone there in the first place. What is our business with North Korea and other issues across the world?
I think for me, some people did say that, and I agree with your I agree with your position on that. That as a sovereign state, the largest black nation, the Nigeria's historical relevance and current relevance, Nigeria has a place in a gathering of other nations, as you rightly said, a yearly ritual. I think what I do agree with, though, is the fact that in sort of talking about world issues and how the world responds to issues of security, Myanmar, and all of those issues, people are saying that, but in your backyard, you seem to have a slightly different view of how other people within Nigeria are being treated. And I think that's the one I would agree with. But we definitely have to participate on UNGA as we do every year.
You see, I don't share the position of Nigeria on these issues. It's most unfortunate. Apart from the fact that our foreign policy doesn't have any focus, not well articulated. The major problem is that people...
No, but Prof, you know, there are certain givens about Nigeria's foreign policy.
Yes.
I mean, I know you are the experts.
But
there are certain givens, and the speech just reflected those traditional concerns. I was concerned that people in foreign affairs, they just do a copy of the same thing we go to say every year.
That's why I'm
so if you say there is a lack of creativity, I agree with that.
No, you see,
even the language
on this issue of nuclearization, please, the method for preparing, for making nuclear bombs is exactly the same way you prepare nuclear for peaceful purposes. It's the same method. All right. If you can acquire the technology, the know-how of how to make bombs, whether you now want to use it for war purposes or for peaceful purposes, wouldn't matter. I am against the position of Nigeria of denying herself the opportunity to acquire the technological know-how. That is my problem. You see, we should learn from North Korea, and that's where I agree with you that at the end of the day, Nigerians should be kept abreast about developments in other countries. We should know the politics surrounding North Korea. North Korea now, okay, look at the speech of Donald Trump. Please, one major feature of his speech is the contradiction. All right? He says that he wants a very strong, independent, and sovereign nation. And he encouraged other world leaders in the assembly to do the same, to follow the same. Now, if Donald Trump has become an apostle, all right, of a strong, an independent, a sovereign nation. And he's asking all others to follow the same. Yes, North Korea has done precisely that, because the North Korean leader is now underscoring the national interest of his country. That's their own priority. So you cannot deny North Korea of having access to what it wants to have to. You see, this is the double standard. But we know quite well that there is the need to put these policies of nuclearization and non-nuclearization in context.
We started with Nigeria, and then we went we went on to talk about international issues. I think before we round off, I would like us to return to one of the issues you mentioned earlier in the highlights of the week, which is this issue about the police saying that newly recruited officers will serve in their states of origin. You made the point that this looks like an attempt to decentralize the police, but some people will say it looks like community policing. But some other people will say, look, what you actually need in Nigeria to solve this problem of vigilantism and some of the local security matters is to actually have state police. It comes up again and again, but you will need legislation to see that through. Now, with threats to national security coming from all kinds of groups, should we be telling the police, the Nigeria police, that look, sending officers to their states of origin is not enough? You really need to overhaul the entire architecture of policing in Nigeria.
True, but it's not a bad way to start, if you ask me. It's not a bad way to start. And I recall the vice president, when he was still acting, had asked the IG to actually do what they call the community policing, to encourage it and all that. Probably this is the fallout of that order by Professor Oshibajo. And I think that when you post people to their respective states, they understand the terrain, they know everybody, they know which criminal is here and all that. I mean, that way we can start cleaning up the system security-wise. Yes, I agree with you, because we ultimately would have to get there, but it's not a bad, yes, it's a process.
Now, isn't this also an issue about trust, about national unity?
We have
about the fact that Nigerians don't trust each other. People have been complaining, for example, of people of the police force sending policemen from the north to the east, and people in the east don't trust policemen from the north because they will assume that they will not defend their best interests. Ordinarily, if this was a united country, should it really matter where any policeman comes from or where he serves?
But also, I mean, for me, there are also issues of cultural nuances and language. There's some things, so if your lingua franca is English, so technically a police officer who's from Kaduna, first language maybe Hausa or English, for whatever it's worth, is posted to Akwa Ibom. There's some things about Akwa Ibom in the state that he would not be natural to him. So that if he's mediating in an issue, something gets reported to him, if you're from there, there's probably a different way you would respond. So yes, there are trust issues. Yes, we're advocating state policing. But if you start with a national, a federal police force, and you now start, as you said, slowly disintegrating that. So if you're from Akwa Ibom, let's start with that. You are still reporting to a federal body, but we begin to see that, okay, is there a difference? Because part of what those arguing for state policing, beyond this issue of federalism and that structural issue, there's that also cultural nuance.
Okay, if you say every policeman should stay in his own community or village, will you do the same for civil defense? Will you do the same for the military? Will you do the same for the
military? Is slightly different because military is not every day.
Yes.
You don't need. I don't need to see the military.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I don't need to see the military every. I mean, military should come in when there are issues of national. But that then it overrides all of that.
National security is first in the air.
I think the way Reuben put it earlier on is what I will go along with. Even though I share the sentiments Wale gave, but the fundamental issue is this. When people talk about state police, community police, I want to remind you of what Prince Nduka Obagbena himself said, probably 1997 or 1998. He was a major advocate of community policing, state policing. The argument brought forward by that time, which I think Prince Tony Mahama also agreed with, is that when you have community policemen, they know the nooks and crannies, they know the people. At the end of the day, it will be easier to trace any hoodlums, any criminal. But if you bring somebody from outside of the community, in settling down, in coping with the language all along, it will take time. By the time he will have succeeded in familiarizing himself, yes, they will post him. That one, they said, no, it's not good enough. People who are used to the terrain, to the area, post them there. The second point is that, from my understanding of the point of Reuben, rather than simply post people to their state of origin, let there be legislation. Let there be stricto sensu, state police, community police. Then we know.
We're working towards it. It's a process.
It's a process.
Yes, as a starting point, where it can be acceptable, but the way we play politics in Nigeria, this recommendation was put in the 2014 National Conference report.
There are many recommendations in that report.
State policing has been proposed a long time ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Back and forth.
But people will argue that the governors, the state governors, will use it to oppress people.
They use
These
a lot
are
of
the
things to oppress
precisely. So now that we are faced with the situational reality, faced with increasing threats, all right, to national security, I think the ideal thing is not to start on a gradual basis. Let there be state police. Let there be community police. Yes.
That will take a long time.
I think that perhaps rather than these piecemeal, ad hoc, episodic attempts to address the Nigerian national question, because this is part of the Nigerian national question, there should be a more systematic, systematized attempt to deal with those issues. And the national conference that we had the other time provided an opportunity. Constitutional amendments by the National Assembly will also probably provide an opportunity. But there must be a political will to recognize the fact that, the basis for the union has to be,
if we have
some people use the word, some people use the word restructuring, some people use the word, but we shouldn't go into the nomenclature.
It might be long in coming if you have to follow that route.
Well, it doesn't take forever for countries to reorganize themselves.
This is a start. As Wale rightly said, at least they've started something. So let's see how
we have to call it off here. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on Arise News. I'm Reuben Abati in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos. From all of us here on Arise News, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching.